everyone. My name is Rosemary Dreger-Carey, and I am Vice Chair of the Falmouth Democratic Town Committee, and I'll be your moderator tonight. Thank you very much to our candidates for joining us tonight, and thanks to all of you here for making this educational forum a priority. And thank you to the Falmouth Public Library and FCTV for making it possible to have this open, live televised forum to happen tonight. So, before we begin asking the candidates to introduce themselves in a 2-minute statement, I would just like to acknowledge the elected officials in the room tonight and thank them for being here. Falmouth Select Board members Doug Jones and Doug Brown. And Sam Patterson, I'm sorry, I was looking for and Sam, thank you. George Slade, Board Selectman. Thank you. Amy Kollar, who is our Massachusetts State Democratic Committee Delegate for the Plymouth and Barnstable District. And Amy's also our timer tonight. Thank you. Have I missed any other elected officials? Okay, thank you. A couple of quick announcements. The emergency exit is right here. Restrooms are down the hall. The bay room is open for overflow capacity. We have a full house here in the Herman room. And please turn your cell phones off at this time. Me too. Okay. I don't know. Okay. I also want to acknowledge Zelda McGregor, who's a Mass delegate for us. Okay. Okay. I'll lay out the ground rules for the night. Our candidates have been seated at the table in random order selected by the FCTV crew tonight. I'll ask each candidate to give a 2-minute opening statement starting from left to right with John. And our timer, Amy, will hold up the 30-second sign when the candidate has 30 seconds to go, and then a stop sign when you're out of time. So after that, each candidate will be asked to respond to questions prepared by the FDTC Executive Committee members, and also with 2-minute answers. Then we will have questions from the audience, again with 2-minute answers. We'll end with a lightning round of very short answer questions, just a couple of words, 30 seconds or fewer. FCTV will be broadcasting our forum live on Channel 13, and the program will be available for viewing again on fctv.org next week. So let's begin. John, please give us your opening statement.
Thank you, Rosemary. So I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. A phenomenal crowd, and obviously the Falmouth Democratic Town Committee for sponsoring this forum. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Mahoney, and I'm running for State Senate in the Plymouth and Barnstable District. Growing up in this district, I've seen it blossom over the years from my hometown of Pembroke, Massachusetts, home of the First Parish Church and the Pembroke Resolves, to the breathtaking Knobska Light in Falmouth, and to my current hometown of downtown Plymouth. I've always called this district home. I grew up in a house. Both of my parents were MTA members. They were both teachers. My mother, Beverly, taught at North Pembroke Elementary for 25 years, and my father, John, taught in the Rockland school system for 20. So today, as a proud member of Local 4, International Union of Elevator Constructors, I hold those values close to my heart. Daily, when I was growing up as a teenager and young adult, I would read the newspaper from cover to cover. I wanted to know what was going on locally and globally. I had a vested interest in what was going on around me, and I was very passionate about seeking change. In 1988, when I was 20, I ran for select board in Pembroke. I came in second out of three. I lost, but I never lost the passion for public service. I moved to Plymouth in 1998, immediately got involved in Babe Ruth baseball. I ran for town meeting, elected form of government up there, our legislature. I did that for a year or two. I got appointed to FinCom. In the last 12 years, since 2008, I've been on the select board in Plymouth. 12 years, 4 terms. So why am I running? As someone who knows the unique issues, I know I can bring transparent and accountable leadership to the Plymouth and Barnstable District, coupled with a vision for a robust economy, a cleaner environment, and overall a better tomorrow for all of us. That's exactly what I'm going to do on Beacon Hill. I'm going to stand up for this district, and I'm going to go up there and fight for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sue?
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for coming and showing up in the rain. I'm so proud to be among you and just really appreciate your interest in civics generally and in this race. People ask me all the time, why are you running? And it's really to make happen and move forward the initiatives that we've all been working on for over 5.5 years while I've been in office, either as a Board of Selectmen member, an Assembly of Delegates member, or in chairing the Barnstable County Economic Development. When I knew the seat was going to be open, I was working with Senator DeMacedo, and he told me he would give me a heads up when the time came. I also called former Senate President Terry Murray, and she said, go for it. And so I felt comfortable, having worked with all the legislators on many projects, to taking my experience and my knowledge of those projects and moving them forward, bringing them to the State House for funding. I have fought for this community, and I will continue to fight for this community at the State House. Most of you know I was brought up oldest of 5 girls. My dad was in a wheelchair, a disabled vet, very active in the community, and really taught me that if you think something is important, it's up to you to make it happen. That kind of fight that he taught me was absolutely crucial when I was stricken with breast cancer. 3 young children, and I miraculously survived it. I was one of the lucky ones. That's the kind of fight I bring to every initiative. When we had the Route 28 expansion and lots of folks were concerned, I made a committee through the Board of Selectmen with my colleagues to bring leadership so that there would be accurate information open to the public so that you would participate in that project. We're now having a similar committee with the fire station. Thank you. I would appreciate your vote, and thanks for coming.
Stephen? Thank you.
Stephen Michael Palmer from Plymouth. I ran for this seat a few months ago. I got 5,000 votes. I'm looking for those votes again. I haven't changed. I haven't flip-flopped. I'm a commissioner of redevelopment authority in the town of Plymouth. I was a town meeting member in the town of Braintree when I was 17 and a half. I was elected. I couldn't serve until I was 18. I moved to South Boston after my father wasn't happy that I didn't get the calling to be a priest at Boston College, so I moved into South Boston. He kept asking me, did you get the calling, Stephen? I said, did Mary Lou Chinsey call me, Dad? Because I had five brothers go to BC, and I decided I was going to go to Cambridge. He said, well, you might as well join the Communist Party because they got nothing good to say about the Irish Catholics over there. So the fact now is that I started buying 3-deckers in South Boston, and I had a school teacher. I was taught at the Archdiocese of St. Augustine's, and I ran against Bulger in 1990, and I got 47% of the vote. And my wife was from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and she didn't know what the Bulgers were until we came back from the honeymoon, and then she decided, you either get out of politics or marry me, and I moved to Plymouth, and I'm a commissioner over there as well as a town meeting member. I enjoy being in politics, but I think they've made a democracy out of our democracy up at the State House. Thank you.
Becky?
Hi, my name is Becky Coletta, and I'm running to be your next state senator. I'm a mother, a wife, a daughter, an attorney, a trained social worker, a small businesswoman, and a local elected official. Like most of you, I wear many hats. But I'm running for this seat because our political and economic system is out of balance. I'm running because the wealthy continue to prosper and the middle class is falling farther and farther behind. What I remember about my childhood are the struggles that my parents faced, but the opportunities that still existed. The Navy helped my dad get computer skills, and he started a small business. But he struggled with alcoholism his whole life, and he was hit by economic forces that were really beyond his control. My mother had lupus from the time she was 13. She raised 4 kids, took care of my blind grandfather with a husband who wasn't around much, and she had to go outside, give up her in-home job to go outside and get health insurance coverage that covered her pre-existing condition. So as a family, we were frequently on the edge of losing everything, and yet all 4 of us kids managed to not only get by, but even do well. But even as I look around, so we had a lot of opportunities that my parents didn't have in their lives. They were able to give those to us. But when I look around today, I see families struggling. I see that my kid comes home from school and has classmates whose parents have died from addiction. I see GoFundMe accounts to pay for medical bills. I see that the middle class is getting squeezed harder and harder. So what do we do about it? At this point, we are not keeping up with the things we need to tackle when it comes to climate change, transportation, and other issues. We can't ignore these challenges anymore. So I'm running to bring progressive tax policies around things like the Fair Share Amendment and closing corporate tax loopholes to give our middle class a break. I'm asking the wealthiest among us to pay a little bit more so that we can have the world-class education and transportation system that I think we deserve.
Excuse me, Becky, your time is up.
Okay.
Thank you. Tom?
Hello, everybody. My name's Thomas Moakley. I'm running for State Senate in the Plymouth and Barnstable District, which includes the towns of Falmouth, Bourne, Sandwich, Plymouth, Kingston, and Pembroke. Our primary is on March 3rd, so regardless of who you decide to vote for, make sure you vote and make sure your friends turn out to vote. Even before I knew the date of when the election was coming up, me and my team have been out knocking doors every single day. And when I knock on people's doors, I tell them that I'm Thomas Moakley, that I'm an Eagle Scout, a graduate of Georgetown University, and that I've been putting myself through the evening program at Suffolk Law School while working full-time for the district attorney. I tell them that I was lucky enough to grow up in Falmouth, a community known for its sense of volunteerism, to parents who made it a habit. Sometimes I might even mention that my grandfather, Ray Kenny, was the principal of T-Ticket and East Falmouth Elementary Schools here in Falmouth. But I'll also tell them that the reason that I'm running is because the issues that are so important to our area and that have become tragically personal to so many of us are also disproportionately affecting young people. That's things like climate change and things like the opioid epidemic. I've lost friends, too many, already just since high school. Now, these are serious issues that require urgent action, and that's why I want to be your state senator. Many people in Falmouth know that I'm no stranger to being the youngest person in the room, but I'm a quick study and I'm eager to learn, and I just want to give back to the community that's been so good to me all my life.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll begin with our prepared questions, and Sue Moran, you will get the first question, and it's on housing. Plymouth and Barnstable counties have a severe shortage of affordable housing. What programs, subsidies, market incentives, rental vouchers, or local zoning changes do you support for building more affordable housing and reducing homelessness?
The Board of Selectmen in Falmouth has been working to break down silos and bring housing advocates together. It's something that's important for the sustainability of our entire community. With respect to the Barnstable County, we interviewed a person who wanted to be a director of a Human Rights Commission, and she talked about the fact that she was worried about the pay because she might then lose her housing. So she was trying to get a job, and the program that she had would not potentially allow her to take it. We've heard of children couch serving. We've heard of children having to move schools. These are problems that affect our lives and our families' lives. It affects our teachers, our first responders, everyone in our community that keeps us vibrant and that we depend on for a balanced lifestyle and community. Bills that I'll bring to the State House to solve this crisis: tax incentives for summer home people so that they'll be able to rent to someone year-round. That's something that Alyssa Galizzi and the Cape Cod Chamber and Susan Giavetti of Plymouth have been working on. Faster permitting for affordable development. Falmouth Board of Selectmen has been having joint meetings to move this forward, and we're going to add builders to the next conversation so we see what they need. And so we're not just looking at 40B and no choices. 40B is something, when I get to the State House, I'm going to revamp so it considers communities like the Cape, eliminating barriers like voting requirements for bylaw changes from 2/3 to a simple majority for housing, and tax incentives. And Barbara Schneider had this idea, a tax incentive for groups like a 300 committee who are smart enough to put land aside. We should have at the same time put housing aside, and that's what I will work for.
Thank you, Stephen.
When I was growing up in South Boston, I worked for Raymond Flynn, the mayor. And the fact is I had many 3-deckers in South Boston at that time before I got married. I was a school teacher again, as I said before. But we had rent control. You know, the rents are skyrocketing now. You know, the elderly can't stay in their homes. They can't pay the taxes. Taxes keep going up. And what happened was Menino came in and he got rid of the rent commission and rent board. So, you know, I'd like to see that some of that come back a little, you know, because people can't afford it. That's why we have homelessness. That's why we have people that don't have any beds or any homes. And, you know, this is what this country was about. You know, give me your tired, give me your poor, give me your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the record refuge of your teething shore. I'm a commissioner of the Redevelopment Authority in the town of Plymouth. And what happens is that we have many subdivisions of Pine Hills, as you know, and Red Brook, et cetera, and plus 55, but it leaves a lot of people out in the cold. The fact is that I'm on the, also as a member of the Plymouth Redevelopment Authority, I'm also a trustee of the Housing Trust, where if someone builds a development, they give hundreds of thousands of dollars to us so we can build affordable housing, which is a wonderful program. But the fact is that we need 40Bs in every town in Pembroke, Kingston, Plymouth, Bourne, Sandwich, and Falmouth. Let's get rid of the laws, let's get rid of the zoning problems, and let's get it done.
Thank you. Becky?
Hi, so right now I'm the chair of the Pembroke Planning Board. I've been on that board for 5.5 years, and it's funny because in the past I was a member of the Board of Selectmen in Hanson, and there's a difference, right, between being on the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board, and there are different perspectives on what a town needs. The problem we run into a lot of times is where is our real priority? People are more comfortable building over 55 housing because it doesn't put as much of a burden on the tax base, right? But then we have no place for young people to live. We have no place for workers to live. If we end up with an aging population and we're going to need in-home services, where are those people going to live? We talk about 40B and its problems, but the question always comes down to what are we really going to build it in our backyards? What is our real priority? I look at something like accessory apartments. We're so opposed to the idea of accessory apartments except in-laws. Why? What's the concern? That we're going to have multifamily and regular subdivisions? That we might have poor people in our own subdivisions? There's work we can do with our existing housing stock. Recently, our planning board looked at a housing production plan. We're looking at what we can do to revamp our zoning bylaws. I agree with Sue that we need to move forward on the bill that's in the legislature to say that we're going to allow zoning bylaw changes to happen at 50% of the governing body instead of 2/3, because we need to be able to come up with homegrown solutions that are going to work to preserve the character of our communities at the same time that we satisfy our need for affordable housing. I'm working on that on our planning board. I'm working on that as a delegate to the Old Colony Planning Council, and I would continue to work on that as your state senator.
Thank you. Tom?
This is a question of what kind of community do we want to be going forward? Do we want to continue down the march towards becoming a albeit pristine, retirement community? Or do we want to maintain the quilt-like fabric of diversity in residents, in industries, in opinions that I've known and loved my whole life? I think that's something worth fighting for. And I would support Senator Sears' bill that would allow municipalities to have more flexibility in deciding whether Community Preservation Act funds could be used towards housing purposes. And it would also allow the exploration of accessory dwellings, like Becky mentioned. And it would also establish a first-time homeowners savings account, which would be tax deductible up to a certain amount, because there's so few people getting into the market here who are actually from the area. And I think it's important that we work to preserve the kind of community that we have here.
Thank you. John?
So some of my proudest votes on the Plymouth board have been the 4-to-1 votes, where I was the one. And it was back-to-back years, I think in 2009 and 10. With the select board, my colleagues voted 4-to-1 to get rid of the CPA, back-to-back years. And town meeting stood with me, and we kept the CPA. We leveraged that. Obviously, you have 10% every year that you can allocate for affordable housing. We purchased a building at the corner of Spooner and Court Street in North Plymouth for homeless individuals. We then, a year or two after that, purchased another building adjacent to it for the same purpose. But now we segregated out. We had one for men and one for women. We're getting them off the street, and then we're transitioning them into a system like Father Bill's, where they can get back on their feet and hopefully get a job and be sustainable. 40B, one-size-fits-all legislation from 1969 that does not work. Mobile homes are not counted towards your affordable housing stock. That's ridiculous. The median income is based off of the Boston area that is applied throughout the entire state. Okay, what someone makes in Boston, they don't make on the South Shore, and they don't make in Barnstable or out in Western Massachusetts. So that affordable housing, quote-unquote affordable housing, doesn't do anything that it tells you. I've been on the doors in Falmouth. Last Thursday, I'm in a household talking to a couple complaining about a 40B being jammed into East Falmouth. Say it's going on in Pembroke. We're facing 3 in Plymouth right now, 2 of them around 350 units, another one for 200. It doesn't get the job done. We need to incentivize around public transportation. There needs to be vouchers, possibly some sort of control, rent control, but we've got to incentivize where the infrastructure is.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to jobs and the economy, and we will start with Stephen Michael Palmer. Even though Massachusetts has a thriving economy, not all people in regions of the state are benefiting. What would you do to help create good-paying jobs and stimulate economic opportunity here in Plymouth and Barnstable counties?
Well, looking around the town and traveling around the town of Falmouth, you see, industrial on Technology Drive. You see the landscapers on the grounds. You see Stop and Shop, and there's not really anything that's coming down the road here for Falmouth to create jobs. Even in Boston, the fact is it's all technology, et cetera. But I was looking at maybe more fishing, as well as maybe some farming. But again, there's no land. I feel that the state could come in and with money for tourism a little more. I feel that the roads have to be done a little better. The fact is that I'm trying to get off the subject here, which I will, because it won't be addressed. Is that the fact is you have to stop the freight trucks from coming in the summertime to cause the traffic that stops the tourists from coming in. How many times have I talked to people and said, I wanted to go to Falmouth, but I was in traffic for 3 hours, and I turned around and went back to Boston. I wish I saw it. This is the Irish Riviera here. Everyone should have the opportunity. But the traffic, let's get rid of it. Let's stop the trucks coming in from Palmer Ave. It just doesn't make any sense. Does that stop people from coming in and spending their dollars on Main Street? Of course it does. So let's get the Steamship Authority. Let's get some power from the legislators and stop it and get people back on the beaches as well as in your stores and to create an economy that you need.
Thank you. Becky?
So I'm somebody who spent a lot of my years as a business lawyer and as a business person. I've worked on businesses developing international markets and satellite communications. I've worked on businesses developing coastal engineering projects and drainage projects. I'm sorry, I have a cold, so I'm trying to not cough all night. Anyway, I have also worked in small businesses. I've been on the board of an organization called the South Shore Women's Business Network. I've seen everything from billion-dollar companies to $1,000 companies, literally, where people are trying to pull together $1,000 to buy a kit so that they can start a business. We are an entrepreneurial society, but the question is, what are we doing to support those organizations? Part of it is working with our chambers to find out what they're hearing from their members. But I think another part of it is to do things like closing corporate tax loopholes that give large corporations an advantage over smaller corporations. Part of it is what are we doing on our planning rules, on our zoning bylaws, to allow businesses to come into our communities in a way that is consistent with the character of our communities and allows for appropriate development of business and industrial areas, perhaps multi-use areas, so that you have housing, rental housing, along with business development. But the other thing is to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place. Part of the reason why I want the wealthy to pay more is because businesses benefit from infrastructure. When we deal with transportation, businesses benefit. When people can get to jobs because they have public transportation, businesses benefit. Our RTAs around here are grossly underfunded. We don't have local transportation options. People who are on the margins lose a car, they lose a job. So there's a lot we need to do with regard to economic development, and it starts with infrastructure.
Thank you. Tom?
Rosemary, these two issues, and so many of the ones we're going to talk about today, I'm sure, are linked. In Barnstable County, the median income is over 6 times the median household price is over 6 times the median income. That's more than even New York City. Now, my family first came to Cape Cod after the Second World War when my great-grandfather, Colonel Everett Fennell, was stationed as a group commander at Otis. But before that, during the Great Depression, he was a camp commander of a civilian conservation corps establishment over in Western Mass. During a time of intense economic crisis, the Roosevelt administration invested in our natural resources. It was not only economically prudent, it was environmentally prudent as well. I think that's what we need to do today with Massachusetts' own sort of a Green New Deal that attracts innovative businesses to our community, that invests in climate-resilient infrastructure, and brings really good jobs into the area, developing our solar potential and things like that. Now, not only unemployment, but underemployment is a serious issue in this area. And these would be really quality, high-paying jobs and innovative jobs that we can attract here by not only creating an environmental policy that's friendly to something like the Green New Deal, but also by implementing the infrastructure in the area, like increased broadband connectivity and other things that attract those types of high-tech businesses to this area.
Thank you. John?
So I'm fortunate to work in the trades, and if any of you have been within the 128 belt recently or in the city of Boston, there's cranes all over the skyline. Billions upon billions are being invested in that area. And I tell everybody I talk to, those cranes were put there in the 1930s when the Quabbin Reservoir was created. It's about water security. They had the foresight to take the water out of the equation and set it up in perpetuity. It comes down to infrastructure, water security, and wastewater. If you go to the town of Stoughton, off of 24, 15 years ago, they were not allowed to develop for a decade. They didn't have water and wastewater security. In the early 2000s, they tied into the MWRA. The cap by the state was lifted. They got a Home Depot development off of 24, $1.1 million of incremental tax revenue came in. And that's what happens. Now you're going to move down to Bourne. You see what's going on in Bourne in the Buzzards Bay area. Okay, so they have a cap. There's no unused sewer capacity. They have a 200,000 gallon per day agreement with the town of Wareham. And there's no excess capacity. So they're going to build their own plant with 100,000 gallons to promote economic development in Buzzards Bay. And if you don't get the excess capacity, the businesses aren't going to come. So it's about proactively investing in infrastructure, predominantly water and wastewater.
Thank you. And Sue?
Thank you. So this is something I'm really excited about in terms of running for your senator. I've been working on economic development through the Falmouth Economic Development Committee, as well as being chair of Barnstable County Economic Development. And what we have here are tremendous resources and just not getting our fair share of the finances from the State House. When you look at, in fact, John was mentioning all the projects going on, they should be going on here in terms of job creation. I'm talking about our water quality. We've been working on improving our water quality for a number of years. We have the smartest scientists. We have incredible retirees and young folks working on our committees, and we've got inventions. We're talking about spending money, small money, on shellfish as opposed to sewering. That's one of the things that, in fact, former Rep. Turkington did a really good job in bringing great financing opportunities so that Falmouth could start cleaning its water. We've got the blue and green economy. As a lawyer, some of what I do is solar development. I think most of you are familiar with the solar development on the landfill. The EDIC did that in the last meeting I was in. The numbers that we were given were, it's over $1 million that's come to the town for that green energy project. So what I'm talking about here are incentives so that we can have young people work here do ocean turbines. Those are things that are going to save our energy. It's going to make our carbon footprint less, and we're going to be able to have those young people stay here because the jobs will be here. And that's one of the reasons I want to be your senator, is to finish these projects that we've started.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to climate and the environment. Nice transition. Massachusetts is a leader on climate change. What measures do you support to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and migrate toward a renewable green energy future? Becky?
And we only have 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So we'll probably all take pieces of this because there's a lot to it, right? One of my good friends has been working on appliance standards for years. She and I have shared an office space for 10 years. She finally got the bill that was one of the 3 bills that were put forth by the state Senate a couple weeks ago, and it was to improve energy appliance standards. That is low-hanging fruit. We approve this isn't Energy Star. These are the minimum standards for selling appliances in the state. And her job got to be a lot more important, and these state positions we're talking about now got a lot more important when there was a change in the White House. There was a backpedaling on appliance standards at the federal level, and these fights are now happening at the state level. These are easy ways to buy appliances that within a year pay for themselves in energy savings and continue to pay for themselves for years to come, so they save money and they save energy. I've also taken a no fossil fuel pledge because I think we need to get fossil fuel money out of politics. So we're, and I think we may have all taken it, I'm not sure, but the goal here is to say we're going to try to look for non-fossil fuel options. When you look at solar and wind in this state, we've actually stalled since about 2017 when we went past the SREX into the new SMART system. We need to remove net metering caps. We need to get more solar built. We need to remove the barriers to building solar. We need to fight harder at the federal level to finish Vineyard Wind and Mayflower Wind. We need to get more clean energy on the books now, because when we look at 2050, that's not the day for no fossil fuels. I mean, for net zero. That's 2050 is the target when the seas start rising by feet. We need to do something now to work on this.
Thank you. Tom?
Massachusetts can and should be a leader on this issue, especially when we see nothing happening in Washington. We've already been a leader on gay rights, we've already been a leader on health care, and we can be a leader here too, because of course it requires a community response. This is not a localized issue, although Cape Cod feels it disproportionately more than most places in the country. Now, I've already mentioned the Green New Deal, but that I think that we should implement on a Massachusetts level. In Barnstable County, our cost of electricity is about 20 cents per kilowatt hour, which is well over the national average that any state pays. And this is why, all the while, the cost of electricity from renewables is decreasing. I think we need to prevent the sunsetting dates of the solar incentives that we have, increase the stock that we ought to invest in moving forward. And most importantly, I think we need to elevate the experts that we have on these issues. We have an incredible resource of scientists right here in Woods Hole who can be leading the charge, telling us exactly what is happening and why, and what will work going forward. Because of course it's going to take a two-pronged approach: mitigation about our energy resources and resiliency about our infrastructure going forward.
Thank you. John?
So Massachusetts is the leader on this issue, and I don't think that Deval Patrick gets enough credit for initiating that over a decade ago, because he took a lot of heat for doing so. So the objective is complete no reliance on fossil fuels, and we have to diversify our portfolio and continue to invest in renewables. So how do you do that? You've got to invest in your higher education centers, whether it be Woods Hole, Cape Cod Community College, MIT, or Bridgewater State. You want to continue to invest in technology and research. We've got to solve some of these problems. I'd love to live long enough where I don't have to drive a car that is, propelled by fossil fuels. I drive a hybrid. I've had it for 6 years, and I love it. I'd love to be able to have solar panels on my home that collect during the day. They collect the energy in a battery or some sort of mechanism in the basement, and then when the sun goes down at night, there's enough storage there to just power the home until the next day, or for 3 to 7 days. As far as the environment goes, one of the things I'm proudest of in the town of Plymouth, Freudian slip, sorry, was in 2012 we created the Division of Marine and Environmental Affairs, a standalone environmental department. We have a department head, 5 individuals underneath it. We are the dam removal leader in New England. Obviously, we lead Massachusetts in wetlands restoration projects. We've also begun in the last decade to strategically come back from the coast. Whitehorse Beach, Long Beach, we've removed a couple of homes on a barrier beach. We went to town meeting. Asked for $305,000 to buy a house and have it demolished from the beach. It's almost unprecedented. And then we use CPA money for a few cottages, cesspools on the beach. Those are only a couple $100,000 each, overwhelmingly supported. The board has recently voted to have 2 homes in environmentally sensitive areas around freshwater bodies removed. So we're doing things proactively.
Thank you. Sue?
Thank you. So a couple of weeks ago, I was testifying at this State House on behalf of the Assembly of Delegates, which of course is the county government. There's so much concern on the Cape that with respect to the decommissioning of the Plymouth nuclear plant, we don't have representation. And if there is some kind of problem, it's not going to stop at the border of Plymouth. And so what we're fighting for with respect to the entire district is that we have someone in the room when Holtec is talking about its plans, when the safety measures are being really shrunken so that there is hardly any notice if there is a problem, when you do have those casks that are really, someone showed me that they're, Diane Turco, they're only a little thicker than your coffee cup, those metal coffee cups. So there's a lot of concern when you talk about various kinds of energy. One of the things that I'm proudest of with respect to Falmouth is that we have been a leader in terms of reuse, recycling, plastic bag. We just don't need all that anymore. And we are first many times in terms of these incentives. And Charlie McCaffrey I saw come in. The Board of Selectmen, when I was chair, and this was Doug Brown's idea, we appointed a climate action committee. And that allows us to look at the effects. Nobody else really that I'm aware of has done this, although they're talking about it in various towns throughout the district, where you look ahead, you look at Minot and say, do we spend $1 million and put it back up, or do we think about retreating? We have to think about all these things now because we're going to look very different in 50 years. And we've started that, and I appreciate all your support in allowing that to happen. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Stephen?
Climate control is not going to go away. Climate control is here to stay. The fact is that I read a lot of newspapers. And yesterday there was an article, you might have seen it in the Globe, and it states that the Vineyard Wind project has been delayed. Now, it's a little disturbing to me to hear this being delayed again. You know, we call him Saint Ted, but the fact is that was Ted Kennedy that, stopped it before. And now it's stopped again. The fact is that it would create 450,000 homes that could be generated by this wind. But it's not getting done, okay? So now what? What are we going to do? We're going to be paying and paying and paying for it without any state funding whatsoever. We have to stand up and say, listen, we need wind power. They closed the nuclear power plants in Sandwich. They did it in in Plymouth, and they lost, 650 jobs. I'm not saying that, we're going to go back to lighting candles, but the fact is we have to create some serious wind power or solar, and it's got to be done on the state level. You can't fool Mother Nature.
Thank you. Okay. Thomas? We'll move on to a new topic, trust in government. And we'll start with Tom. The public's trust in government, elected officials, and each other is declining, leading to political dysfunction and gridlock. What measures or policies will you take to restore trust and confidence in government?
Well, first off, I'll say that if there's anything positive we can glean from the vicious bile that's being thrown back and forth in Washington, it's that your vote matters and that we have to vote. But I'll also say that one of my inspirations for getting involved in politics was my great-uncle Joe Moakley, who was a congressman from Boston. And one of the most important lessons I learned from him is that one of the most important tools in a legislator's toolbox is credit. And if you're willing to give up credit, you can get nearly anything done. That's the kind of senator that I want to be. I also think it's important that we get money out of politics. I did a little bit of research and I added up the numbers, and between both sides of the aisle, the candidates running for this office raised over $200,000. And this is a race that's only lasted for a couple months so far. And I imagine that all five of us would very much prefer to be knocking on doors and connecting with voters rather than making fundraising calls. Now, I think we can learn from other electoral systems that put a cap on expenditures, give equal advertising time to competing candidates, and have a limit on the duration of elections as well. The problem of campaign finance is a problem of participation, and no one should ever be too poor to feel like they can run for office or engage in the political system. And that's one of the many ways that I think that we can make our government a little bit more accessible and transparent.
Okay, thank you. John?
So, a couple of years ago, there was a resident of Plymouth who wrote a very long editorial in the local newspaper, and it condemned the community, and I read it, and probably 50 to 60% of it was fabricated, was not accurate data. So I emailed the individual, and I said, hey, John Doe, you know, I just read your editorial in the local paper, and direct quote, and I still have the email string, it's riddled with inaccuracies. This is my cell phone, this is my landline, this is my email. The next time you do something like that, reach out to me and I'll give you the accurate information. So he replied, and this is an individual with a master's degree, that it didn't matter. It didn't matter. So I've met 3 people in the last 5 years in Plymouth, reasonably intelligent individuals that have no problem telling me that what they put out on Facebook or in social media was completely fabricated, and they could defend it because the end justifies the means. And that's the culture that we live in today, and it's embarrassing. I have a 1-hour availability at the Senior Center in Plymouth, Massachusetts. I insist that when I go in there, I have a dry erase board at the front of the room. I'm probably brutally honest to a fault. It's kind of a joke among my friends. I call it an AIH, an accurate information hour. Okay? I go up there, we put statistics, graphs, numbers on the board, and the people come in, and as soon as you give them accurate information, okay, they start nodding their head up and down because now they have the truth, because they're talking to people who are either lying to them or not telling them the truth. Everything that we do, public votes and testimony, should be out in the open unless it's compromising, you know, litigation, the security of Massachusetts, or some sort of real estate transaction. Other than that, 99% of it should be out in the open.
Thank you. Sue?
Thanks. So, you know, I was born in St. Louis, and that's the show me state. I think every one of you who have contacted me know that I get back to you immediately. If I can't resolve an issue, I let you know who can. For me, it's about responsiveness. I've been a lawyer for about many years, and that's what I sell: solving problems. I sell being able to, you know, if I can't do it, I will find someone who can. And I got an email about a week ago from someone I had met at a fundraiser. She's a principal who wanted to start a STEAM project for educators, and she said she needed some seed funding. I contacted someone who I know who does seed funding. She had a response within 24 hours, and that's just something we all do. I see a lot of volunteers. I see a lot of folks who work on committees. Call my cell phone. It's 508-524-9819. It's in my pocket. I answer it, or I'll get back to you. That's the kind of responsiveness I've always given. That's the kind of responsiveness that you'll get going forward when I'm at the Senate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stephen?
I'm taking my statement off of John Lennon. I'm sick and tired of hearing things from uptight, short-sighted, narrow-minded hypocrites. Just give me some truth. The fact is that, you know, you look at the State House and they've approved themselves an $18 million raise last year, you know, and the fact is that Charlie Baker was up for re-election. He says, oh, I'm not going to take that raise, but he gets re-elected and he takes the money. He takes the raise after he gets elected. That's like deceit, in my opinion. I'm looking for some reverse taxes. If they're going to pay me $60,000 a year to be a senator, I'm giving 6% back. You know, there's 18,000 people in this Commonwealth of Massachusetts that make over $100,000 a year. I mean, where is this money going? You know, the taxes are in Plymouth go up every year, hundreds of dollars. They're taxing people out of their homes. And the fact is, we don't get anything back. I mean, they don't pick up my trash. I'm not paying for water, you know. I have a septic tank. I mean, and my kids, Daddy, what's a co-payment with insurance? Why do I have to pay if you're paying thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars every year? What is a deductible, Daddy? My daughter graduated from college this year, summa cum laude, and my son graduated from high school. In my house, you were police, plumbers, or politicians. He's going to be a plumber, okay? But the fact is, he doesn't understand the economics of this world today that we live in. You know what I mean? I remember when a phone call was a dime, okay? I remember when health care and dental was covered by your employee. You know, the companies like General Electric or, you know, Raytheon or General Ship. Now it's $15,000 a year, and I don't even get sick. So it's the fact, where's all this money going to? You know what I mean? It's got to be federally regulated.
Okay, thank you. Becky?
Hi, so I think a big part of the problem is transparency. That people don't know what happens up at the State House. They hear about it sort of a little bit trickling through the news. And some of us took a transparency pledge that says when we go there, we're going to try to make sure that our committee votes and as many of our backroom dealings that take place at the committee level can be made public and be made available to the public. But I also think it starts during our campaigns. Are we saying the same things in our campaigns to everyone? So one of the things we do a lot when we're running for office is we seek endorsements from a lot of different groups. And in those endorsements, we tell people where we stand on any number of issues. And so what I've done is I've put my endorsement questionnaires, a good number of them, on my website, so that people want to see where I stand on issues that have been asked to me by some special interest group. They'd get a sense of my answer. And it's not because you're going to agree with all of my answers. You're not. I guarantee no one agrees on everything, right? But the reason I put it out there is you know where I'm coming from. And you know that I will speak to you about any of those issues any time of the day. My number is 781-267-6222. You can call me anytime. I will meet one-on-one with anyone I can between now and March 3rd and let you know where I stand, why I stand there. One of my biggest, I got a donation this weekend from a friend of mine who I met through the Kiwanis Club. He's a colonel. He and I don't agree on almost any political issue, pretty much none. He has introduced me to his daughter, who is one of my best friends. We've become like family. He has had a hard time accepting the fact that I might actually win this seat, but he gave me $55 over the weekend for my 55th birthday. And it was because he believes in me as a person, and that's all I ask of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've addressed all of our prepared questions, so I'm going to take some questions that we were given from audience members. And we'll start with Thomas. Tom, so if elected, what might we expect as your first piece of legislation? And every candidate will have an opportunity to answer these.
My first piece of legislation would deal with the opioid crisis. This is something we haven't talked about yet, but is one of the things that's most important about my reason for getting into this campaign, and I think it's something that I don't think anyone in this room hasn't been personally affected by. Now, there's no magic bullet for this, but there's a lot of different things we can do. We can invest in community mental health centers, because if you cut your finger, you know that you need to go to the emergency room. But if you or a loved one are in the throes of addiction, a lot of people don't know where to go. And even those people who do know where to go might not be able to find the beds at those locations or get access to those beds because there's a lot of health insurance issues that go along there. People who do have good health insurance are taken advantage of, and people who don't have good health insurance are turned away. So we need to seek parity between mental health and physical health care as well. So my top priority going forward would be the opioid epidemic, and that would be one of my first bills.
Thank you. John?
So the first thing, if I'm fortunate enough to win this seat, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to the 5 other town managers, town administrators, and their respective chairs, and we're going to sit down. We're going to have a meeting. We're going to go over an entire checklist of what these communities need with respect to infrastructure. Do they have a home rule petition that needs to get through committee? What are their needs exactly? And how are we going to go up there and compete to get those dollars back here? When you talk about introducing legislation, I agree with Thomas. You have a situation with the opioid epidemic that needs to be tackled. I know a lot of you in the room are aware there is a nuclear power plant in Plymouth that went offline in May of 19. There's significant issues around that safe decommissioning of that plant, and that needs to be watched because right now the town of Plymouth and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has very little input because over the course of the last several decades, your federal Congress and Senate have built the NRC up to a point of almost omnipotence. Okay, and Holtec, and prior to that was Energy, and Boston Edison didn't have to do anything for the local state economy. We have infrastructure needs. We've got to make sure, obviously, the two biggest signature pieces in this district are bridges. And then every day we have buildings and schools we want to invest in and roads. So some of these pieces of legislation could be, in theory, already be putting forth by someone else. But I'm ready to get up there and roll up my sleeves and fight for everyone in this district.
Thank you. Sue?
So I've been working on a first piece of legislation that is an economic development piece of legislation, and it's about farming the ocean. We've had such great success with respect to our use of shellfishing to clean our waters. It's also been a great source of research, a great source of job creation. And now I'm looking about taking that idea and expanding it to ocean farming, looking at various kinds of seaweed that not only can keep our oceans clean, but that also will create a food source and jobs for folks that don't require traveling across the bridge, that really you'd be able to do locally. So that's something, and have a lot of time with your families at home. So if you're asking for the first piece of legislation I would file, that would be it.
Okay, thank you. Stephen?
My first piece of legislation would be to see if we can get the freight trucks. Now, I'm not here to talk about troublesome international affairs or the large domestic problems under consideration in our nation's capital. Those problems of the world seem to us large, uncomprehendable, unmanageable, out of touch with our day-to-day lives. But what I would like to talk about today are the problems that begin at home, the comprehensible, manageable problems that can be solved with care, action, and a commitment by the people today. Again, let's get the freight trucks from Palmer Ave over to New Bedford, okay? Let's tell that steamship authority we have the power to do that. Definitely over the summer, okay? These are the things that, you know, the bread and butter, if you want to call it this. This is what's going to help this community bring more dollars into Main Street, okay? In Plymouth, the NRC, you can't fight these people. Again, John knows what's going on. John's been a selectman. Those rods aren't going anywhere. Heaven help if anything happens over there, okay? I was a town meeting member in Precinct 5. I've toured that plant myself, okay? It looks safe, but who knows? I mean, it's discrepancy. It's just terrible the way, you know, they don't enjoy talking to us, you know. John's been through it. I pat John on the back. He's a fighter, you know, but I'm a fighter also. Again, we have two ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth, okay? This is going to be a brand new deal. So you better elect the right person that's going to get the job done, okay? Not nationally. People talk about opiums. Listen, they make 25 opiums per person in the United States of America. I don't think they make that many M&Ms.
Okay, thank you. And Becky?
Hi. So the weird thing about this special election is the reality is we're jumping in the middle of a legislative session, near the end of a legislative session. So our first order of business is actually probably not going to be to file new legislation, but to work on the legislation that has just been reported out of the joint committees on February 10th or 11th. So we have the transportation bills in the Senate, the carbon bill, the energy efficiency bill. We have the behavioral health bill. There are some bills that are tackling really important issues to our district. Are we going to have carbon pricing? What is that going to look like? Is it going to be the TCI that the governor's putting forward? Is it going to be something that's directly on the producers of carbon? How quickly are we going to move towards net zero? These are things that are going to be worked out in the legislation that's pending right now, and that's why I would like to jump in and get to work for our district. Yes, we need regional equity in funding our district when we look at the budget this year. So it's going to be the budget, the transportation initiatives, the carbon pricing, and the behavioral health initiatives that I'm looking to get to work on right away.
Thank you. Okay, new question from the audience, and we'll start with John. John, what is your position regarding healthcare options for citizens in Massachusetts?
Say that again?
What is your position regarding healthcare options for citizens in Massachusetts?
Well, all I can tell you is that when deregulation came in the mid to late 90s, healthcare was deregulated. From 97 to 06, it was a 150% increase in the cost of healthcare. So what Mr. Obama did with respect to healthcare, I applaud him for that. We need to shore that system up. Obviously, we have something going on in the White House right now that if that individual could, he would get rid of it. And the billions of dollars of subsidies from the federal government to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and these other states would be gone. And then we would be sitting there saying, my God, what are we going to do now? That would be absolutely catastrophic. So I'm a proponent of doing whatever we can to make sure that that program is shored up and that everyone has the ability to get on, whether it's the Commonwealth's program or anything in a town or city, and make sure that everyone is covered by a program.
Thank you. Sue?
So I basically have a doctorate in dealing with insurance companies. I've been doing it for a very long time. I know many of us have. And the two things I think that are that need to be addressed immediately, the first one is the cost of medications and drugs. There are folks who have to go without, who parse their own doses out because they can't afford the full prescription. There's no reason why government can't step in and stop this arbitrary pricing and just the stranglehold that the drug companies have on our communities. That's the first thing that has to be addressed. The second thing that has to be addressed are with respect to the co-pays and just having the insurance companies have sufficient time in terms of treatment. If you look at opioids, for example, the 30 days that is often covered doesn't put a dent in it. In fact, the recurrence is chiefly a result of of being kicked out of treatment because insurance doesn't pay. I think if we address that part of the insurance problem, that would put a big dent in the opioid problem that employers deal with, families deal with, and many of us who have friends and relatives deal with.
Thank you. Stephen?
Fact is, they had, again, I go back to the newspapers, the New York Times, Boston Globe, and the fact is, the Wall Street Journal, getting sick and going broke. It's going to get to the point where, we're going to be like another country that, unless you have the money up front, you're not going to be serviced, This is a country that is so wealthy and has so many great things going on, but yet healthcare is dragging us down. The companies that, insure people, last year, $252 billion went to salaries and taking care of the, the corporate world, corporate welfare. It could have went right back to the patients that need it. I mean, how many stories do we have to hear? To get it done, we need help from the corporate world. We need help, legislation. Again, when I was growing up, you had dental and health care. Today, it's $15,000, $20,000 to have that. My wife died 7 years ago, and I realized how much money has been going to the health care companies. And that's just me, okay? I've worked 7 days a week after my wife died so I can pay for my two children. One graduated from high school, the other one graduated from college. Let's get some new laws for the corporate people to represent us, the working class.
Thank you. Becky?
Hi. So I mentioned that my mother had lupus when I was growing up. So we grew up always afraid that she would get sick when she wasn't covered by medical insurance, because back then you had pre-existing coverage limitations, and you had to go a certain period of time without being sick if you wanted to get covered again. We've gotten past that right now, if we keep that in place, if we keep Obamacare in place. But these are federal issues. What I'd really like to see is a single-payer health system that gets us to the point where we get more efficiencies in the system. Single payer cuts out a lot of the cost because right now you have, I mean, in the meantime, we could go to a single form that everyone has to fill out. Every health insurance company has to accept because doctors' offices right now are spending a tremendous amount of money administering health insurance plans, right? So we need to get away from individual health insurance plans, putting a burden on our healthcare system. But that really, to be effective and to be really strong, would have to happen at the federal level. At the state level, what I'd like to see right now are behavioral health systems. This bill that I was talking about that's been put out there would start to try to move more behavioral health providers onto insurance plans, try to get the insurance companies to use common forms for behavioral health specialists so that we can get more behavioral health providers to provide services to people with health insurance so that people can get the service they need.
Thank you. Thomas?
In 2015, my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer, and though they gave him, I think, just a matter of months at the time, he went on living for 4 more years. And he did that by moving on successively to treatment after treatment, finding whatever would work. And he did that out of bravery and boldness, but he was able to do that because he spent his career in the service, so he had the military health care plan that allowed him to do so. Not everybody is so lucky. And the fact that profit and greed is at the center of the healthcare industry is to blame. We need to put a cap on the cost of drugs, a cap on premiums, and ensure parity for mental health care.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, we'll start with Sue. Municipal community broadband, what is your view and how can you be effective?
So this is a timely question. The Falmouth Economic Development Industrial Corporation is looking right now at a survey to see whether folks in Falmouth are satisfied with their provider. Looking to see whether there are, I know, right? Okay, the first question's always easy. That just sucks you right in. So it's a monopoly. And so we can't get Verizon to come over the bridge. What this means, though, when you look at it in the broad picture, is economic development at its finest. If you are able to have better internet, you can work at home more. That means there are less cars on the road. That means there's less traffic on the new bridges. I'm on the bridge fix team, and we're looking at sizing it for, green kinds of travel and fewer cars. Well, something like municipal broadband can fix that. They're talking now about medical providers doing kind of FaceTime type of medicine. Well, that's something that certainly might bring down your medical costs. I would hope so. But then you could have potential, easy answer questions, or at least know whether you take the next step. There are just a limited amount of opportunity if we use something straightforward like better internet service. And by the way, part of the survey is what would you like it to cost? One of the ideas for paying for it might be a municipally based service where you have some of the hotel tax might go for that. Hotel tax might go for other things like housing, but this is an idea. And it was a community group that came to the EDIC, and they're continuing to work on it now. And that's something that more and more towns across the district are looking at. So that's one example.
Thank you. Stephen, yeah, thank you.
Yes, I agree with broadband. I think it would help the community tremendously. Pembroke, Kingston, Plymouth, Bourne, Sandwich, and Falmouth. It's just the fact is it hasn't just started to get into the systems of the government. So, I'm just going to say I would favor it. I'm not going to go on like attorneys go on and on and on. I'm just going to tell you I agree with it, and I hope it comes real quick. Thank you very much.
So he's surrounded by attorneys. What can he do? Sorry, Stephen.
It's okay.
I am who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I've been actually looking at community access to internet since that was the first committee I joined when I moved to Hanson in 2003, and we established the Whitman-Hanson Community Access TV Corp. What we found, though, is that Verizon didn't want to come in because it cost too much to wire the town with a second provider. And part of the deal that happened was that Verizon wanted to get rid of town-by-town agreements that required you to cover the entire town if you were going to come into the town, and town-by-town agreements that required you to put aside 5% of the franchise of the cable services to pay for things like Falmouth Community TV. And the state said no. And I think it was right to say no, because we would have lost a lot of our funding of community TV in that process. I think community TV in our neck of the woods is critical because it's the only way that we get covered. The Boston stations aren't down in our district, and any of the 6 down in our districts on a regular basis covering what's happening. It's our community TV stations that are covering what's happening. So part of the fight there that happened in terms of where Verizon was going to lay down wires was around protecting community TV. But the other piece of that is, when I first moved to Pembroke, I talked to my friend who works for Level 3, and I worked in the satellite communications field for 10 years, and I watched people lay down telecom infrastructure around the world. And we literally opened up markets as the first private international satellite provider. The difficulty is one of cost and expense and who's going to put in the infrastructure. Right now, when I went to my friend who works for Level 3, another telecom provider, it's now called something else, and we went there, I said, why can't we just do a Wi-Fi broadband network locally, and we'll charge people and we can make it work? And he said, well, Becky, the problem is that nobody's investing in fiber right now because we're about to hit 5G. So the question is 5G coming? Is it coming quickly enough, or do we need broadband on our own?
Thank you. Tom?
I think this is a splendid idea, and it's something that is part of a 21st century infrastructure. It's not just roads and bridges, it is telecom, and it is broadband. And I mentioned earlier the fact that, Falmouth and Plymouth can be innovation hubs even more than we already are, attracting more innovative businesses, high-tech businesses to create new jobs that will allow people to stay here and not be forced to move to Boston or other areas or commute to those places to find jobs. So I think this is a great idea, and I think it'll attract more businesses to the area.
Thank you. John?
I also agree with my fellow colleagues up here on the board. So it's a great idea, but ultimately, what are you doing? You're trying to proactively invest in infrastructure too, which in theory will also create jobs and economic development. But at the end of the day, who's paying for it, and what about the cost? So I did hear about this issue from a very passionate individual on a door in Bourne, over in Sagamore Beach. Gave me a quick lesson about the canal and how that works and getting across and the cost involved. But this is something I certainly making commitment to you that I'll do everything in my power, if elected, to obviously pursue this issue.
Thank you. Okay, another question from the audience, and we'll start with Stephen on this. In southeastern Massachusetts, including the Cape and Islands, people have to travel prohibitive distances to the nearest abortion provider. This means abortion and other reproductive health care is practically inaccessible for some. As a senator, will you work to improve access to abortion in southeastern Massachusetts?
From the moment of conception until natural death, human life is a God-given right that should be fully protected by the law. My mother made the right choice. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Becky?
I think a right is not really a right if it's not available. For those of us who have money, we can go and get an abortion. I'm too old for that now, quite honestly. But for people who have money, if it were my daughter or my daughter-in-law, if I had one, I would be able to get them to care, right? I think we all could. Looking around the room, I bet a lot of us have resources. We had the ability to get here tonight. We could probably get them. But it's an equity issue. People who don't have the access to transportation or the access to money don't have the rights that those who have more access have. So we need to work to bring a full panoply of reproductive services, including abortion services, to our district. I think it's ridiculous that people have to go into Boston to get this type of service, or Rhode Island, or somewhere else. I think we have to work on this right away.
Thank you. Tom?
Cape Cod is a healthcare desert for a lot of specialties, and that's a problem. It's not just reproductive health care, it's also maternal health care and a lot of other things like that. But I support the Roe Act, and I think that access should be expanded beyond just the Boston area.
Thank you. John?
So I haven't heard this one out in the doors yet or out and about, but I do know that right now I believe it's Boston, Marlborough, Worcester, and Springfield are the 4 available options, and the overall budget is $21 million. So certainly nobody's reached out to me, and I certainly agree with Becky's comments, the disparity with respect to income, available transportation, and so, probably obviously gender and race is involved in there too. But if that's something that obviously funding is lacking for, that's something that needs to be looked into.
Thank you. Sue?
Absolutely. We should have proper health care in the Cape. There's no question. Women have a right to health care, including abortion health care.
Thank you. Okay, so we have taken all of the questions from the audience, except for a few that will be going into the lightning round. So we prepared some questions that we're looking for just short answers, yes, no, up to 30 seconds of embellishment. So we'll start with carbon tax. Let's see, who are we starting with? Beckett, thank you. Okay. So currently, carbon pollution has no economic consequences for energy producers. Would you support a carbon tax?
I would. I'd like to see it coupled with something to protect lower income people who may not have public transportation options.
Thank you.
I also would support a carbon tax, especially if it was a revenue neutral carbon tax, like something that British Columbia has put into place, where it's already decreased their emissions by 15% just since it's been implemented.
John?
Yes, I applaud Beacon Hill for currently looking at this issue and trying to work collaboratively with approximately 12 other states, trying to put together a long-term solution. And we've got to tackle this issue, and we've got to get to net zero emissions.
And Sue?
Absolutely agree. I agree with all of the carbon emission legislation that's put forth by Senator Eldridge and others, but I think we have to look at the cost to working families and be sure that we don't make that a penalty of finding a job where you need a job and want a job.
Going back to the newspaper, USA Today had a article on it and said oil was 36% of greenhouse emissions, natural gas was 31%, coal was 13%, renewable was 11%, and nuclear were 8%. Yes, we should tax them. Thank you.
Okay, new question for Tom. Do you support the Massachusetts Fair Share Amendment proposal that raises new revenues from the highest income taxpayers to fund quality public education, the repair and maintenance of roads, bridges, and public transportation? And if not, what's the alternative?
Yes, I would. And these are really important causes. And we've talked about a lot of spending programs today, and we need revenue for that. And this would create over $2 billion in revenue. And this is talking about only people who earn an income, not even net worth, an income of over $1 million. That is twice the amount needed to qualify you as a 1%er. So I think it's very reasonable, especially in this climate of rampant income inequality.
Thank you. John?
So the Commonwealth is a $42 or $44.6 billion entity. We have an exposure for infrastructure yesterday of about $100 billion, probably about 2.5 times the size of our budget. So do I support this? Absolutely. It's going to be democratically elected. It's going to go to the ballot. And the money's going to be handled responsibly because it's going to be earmarked for public education and infrastructure.
Thank you. Sue?
I absolutely agree. I think the real challenge is going to be at the State House and what happens to the funds. This district needs to fight for funding going to our bridges, which are falling down. We have a plan to go forward. That's one of the things. We've got to look at our Route 3 traffic. That has to be addressed. And so it's a matter of, just like education, there's a great new education plan, but teachers are worried that some of those funds are not coming to the Plymouth Barnstable District because teachers and administrators were not asked about it. So I think when we have this kind of legislation, we really have to follow the money.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yes, let's just tax and spend. You know what I mean? That's what we have income tax for. That's why we have excise tax in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's where that money should be going. As a town meeting member in Plymouth, we had a $5 million incentive to fix the roads. I said, listen, what do we pay the excise tax for? Let's just tax and spend. You know, I'm among all Democrats. I'm among all liberals. I'm a moderate. No more taxing and spending the people. They don't have it anymore.
And Becky?
Well, that's why I'm for the Fair Share Amendment, why it's been a key part of my platform from day one, because the middle class doesn't have it. And we have real needs to fund higher education, transportation. The RTA only gets about $80 million a year for the entire state. That includes Brockton, Springfield, Plymouth, the Barnstable Regional Transit Authority. All of the regional transit authorities share $90 million a year. We need resources. The middle class doesn't have it. This is asking it for the people who have benefited the most from the infrastructure we have here in place in this state. And it's fair to ask them to pay a marginal tax rate of 4% on their income over $1 million a year.
Thank you. Okay, new question for John. John, will you be an advocate for universal pre-K?
Yes. So Lou Holtz once said, if you're average, you're the best of the worst and the worst of the best. So in the context of public education, Massachusetts is the top out of 50 states. But internationally, we're lagging. We have to continue to proactively invest in education. I would support this wholeheartedly.
I am also in favor. I think that it will provide a great start for our youngest folks. They can have immediate help with learning if that's what they need. The pre-K programs should get immediate support from the state. My daughter was a teacher, as many of you know, and I can't tell you how big a job it is for an educator to try to even out various ways of learning and various abilities of learning. And if we catch these things a little bit earlier and give the kids the support they need, we're going to have a greater younger generation.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yes, I was a first grade teacher when I first started in school and over in St. Augustine's in South Boston for the Archdiocese. And the fact is, I supported this as a town meeting member in my town of Plymouth, so I'm absolutely for it. Thank you very much, and I miss my kids and I miss the smiles.
So I think pre-K education, again, it's a question of equity. People who can afford to get pre-K education generally do. People who can't may get into an early intervention program and they may not. I think quality pre-K education is important as a starting base for all of our kids.
Stephen, my dad went to St. Augustine's for elementary and grammar school. And my grandparents met teaching at the base as well. I support universal pre-K. I think it's essential to raising curious and well-developed students.
Thank you. Okay, we're getting down to the wire, so just yes, no answers if you could. And the first one's for Sue. Do you support a ban on semi-automatic rifles and semi-automatic pistols?
Absolutely, and I appreciate the work of Grandmothers Against Guns Fund Group. Look into it.
Stephen?
Yes.
Absolutely no reason for a civilized society to have automatic and semi-automatic weapons.
I support stricter gun control, but I think we need a more practical approach to it than this in the context of DC versus Heller, or else a federal court is just going to strike it down. We need to be smarter about it, talking about licensing and registration.
John.
Thomas, you stole my thunder. So I'm proud of the fact that the state of Massachusetts has proactive, gun legislation, and obviously I would support anything else to come along. But with respect to the legal precedent that Thomas just, there's some legal barriers that have to be, you have a Supreme Court decision that would have to be, vacated. So.
Thank you. So this is a question for Stephen. Do you support the Safe Communities Act, which seeks to restore community trust by delineating the rights of immigrants and the responsibilities of local and state law enforcement in immigration matters? Very short answer, please.
Again, give me a tired, give me a poor, give me a huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The record refuge of your teething shore. Send me these, the homeless, the tempest tossed. I left my lamp beside the golden door.
Becky.
Yes, I support the Safe Communities Act wholeheartedly.
As do I. I think it's there's a lot of misconceptions about it. All that it does is make sure that everyone in our community has the same sort of procedural justice that we expect.
There are those on the other side of the aisle that are framing this into something that it is not. I don't want law enforcement up and down the street acting as immigration agents. There are already plenty of parameters in place. I certainly support this.
One last lightning question for
Yes,
Becky
I
to
do.
start. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Sue. Okay. I think this goes to Becky. Do you support legislation for medical aid in dying?
Yes, I do. I think that's the least we can do to allow people to die with dignity in the way that they choose.
This is something I have personal experience with, and I support it.
There was a court case a month ago in Massachusetts with respect to this issue, and obviously the legislature is currently dealing with it, and that's, those details could be hashed out in the legislation so that we put protections in place and make sure that it's, enacted effectively.
I do, and I'm happy Roger's appealing.
I support.
Thank you. Okay, so we've reached our time limit here at the library. So I want to thank you to all the candidates for your preparation.
And for Rosemary.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary.
So we wish you all the best and assure you that the Falmouth Town Democratic Committee will work our hardest to support whichever candidate prevails. A few reminders before we go. The state Senate candidates will be on the ballot in the general election Tuesday, March 3rd. The special election is Tuesday, March 31st. Please vote. It's never been more important. Also on the ballot on March 3rd will be Amy Kullar for the Falmouth Democratic, and the Falmouth Democratic slate. The next meeting of the Falmouth Democrats is Wednesday, March 19th at the Gus Canty Center, and we will. February. I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. Okay, Wednesday. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, since you mentioned March 19th, the Legislative Committee of the League of Women Voters is going to have a program here on March 19th. It's going to be about voting because that's the centennial vote of the League and of the women's suffrage. And it's going to have David Vieira, Dylan, and Michael Palmer. And we're going to be talking about voting issues.
Thank you, Judy. All right, thank you everyone for coming. So much.